fully implemented. On to the international stories. At least 45 people have been killed in airstrikes targeting militants in northwestern Pakistan. Security officials say the militants' family members were among those killed in the raids in the Khyber tribal district. Pakistani jet fighters pounded targets in the Tira Valley from which suicide attacks were being prepared. In the meantime, U.S. President Barack Obama has hailed the end of U.S. combat operations in Iraq. President Obama, in a speech, says the U.S. has paid a huge price to put Iraq's future in its people's hands. Reports say Mr. Obama may want to concentrate on the issues that really matter to his electorate, those that will influence voters in critical midterm elections in the next 2 months. Earlier, the U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates arrived in Iraq ahead of a handover ceremony to mark the formal end of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Those are the headlines. Back to you, boss.
You mind raising up your right hand? Yeah, thank you. That's how presidents do it. President Obama did that, and good luck, Jonathan, as well. And I'll say, perhaps he's going to raise that right hand on May 29, 2011. No, keep your comments. Joker Rogers on News Track. See, back out here at 11. So let's talk about the Nigerian Stock Exchange. The demutualization of the exchange has been one of the issues that's been on the burners over the past almost 10 years since the stock exchange started romancing the idea of going public. Following in the footsteps of the South African stock exchange called the JSE that was demutualized in 2005, because the big brother of the African securities exchanges. So trying to follow up in that footsteps, the stock exchange decided to go a similar route. That was then. It's been several years down the line and things have changed ever since it's getting a lot of bit messier. But this was what the stock exchange planned to do. In summary, the stock exchange actually planned to do an IPO, what you call an initial public offering. When a public offering is when a company is coming forward for the first time to go public and sell its shares to members of the public in thousands and around hundreds of billions of shares. So the stock exchange would therefore become a profit-making organization, coming out of being a company limited by guarantee to become a limited liability company, and you and I can invest in the shares of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. One of the plans back then was that the existing council members, both ordinary members, that's individuals, and registered who are brokerage firms, will become directors in the new stock exchange. But this was what we gleaned, what the Undi Okereke's administration planned for the demutualized stock exchange. Council members who were at the time of the demutualization, even though Okereke was still in the saddle, she was let off about a month ago, were to get 33% of the new stock exchange. The staff of the stock exchange will get 7% shares, and the general public will get 60%. That gives you 100%. That was the proposal by the Ndi Okereke on UK's administration, and those were some of the proposals put forward to the SEC. The Securities and Exchange Commission is very much interested in demutualizing the stock exchange. So there's no other better folks to look at this very important issue than investors themselves, the general public. And one of the gladiators in the Nigerian investing community is joining us live in the studio this morning. Sir Sunny Nwosu is with us. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for being here. Sunny Nwosu is also the national coordinator for the Independent Shareholders Association. And the idea to do demutualization of the stock exchange actually started around the presidency of Alhaji Abdul Razak as the president of the stock exchange back then. That was about 9 years ago. But things have changed. Things have moved on rapidly since then. And the idea was that this would be in the interest of your investors. Yes or no?
I totally agree to demutualization of the stock exchange, because it's an avenue for you to actually reap from where you sow. Presently, the structure of the stock exchange is a non-profit organization which then means that whatever is the balance between the expenses and the receipt will be shared somehow, somewhere among the council members, and that also affords the staff to go home with a better pay, within the scope of the earnings of the stock exchange. So the mutualization will definitely help us to also go home with something, despite the fact that we are using the platform to practice capitalism.
What does a demutualized stock exchange will look like to you?
Well, the mutualized stock exchange will show some seriousness, like any business that is running to make profit within the system. So the mutualized stock exchange would have turned in profit that will be shareable among all the owners. Of course, the owners will be the shareholders of the place, and then the staff of the place, the workers of the place, will also benefit from a very nice remuneration package in line with business intentions.
In terms of corporate governance, there were a number of issues raised as far as how the stock exchange is governed, the council and things like that, in terms of transparency and disclosure issues. Do you think a demutualized NSE will do better?
Yeah, it will do better, because as at that point, it then means that the account will be subjected to scrutiny by more than the people who are doing it now, because it's a private institution. And take it from the angle where you have, let us assume that at the end of the day, probably we'll have 100,000 shareholders. An opinion will be formed in segmental form by this 100,000, while the directors, who are presently council members, will have to come in with what we call annual report for us to look